This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Stand out with a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything. Your products, content you create, and even your time. There's a point in which the general population would flock to art museums. They would cherish all the beautiful art and the galleries filled with sculptures and paintings. They would be inspired by what they saw. However, now times more often than not, you see art museums are less than filled. And the pieces you find in art museums today often look like a Redditor's room, or someone may have taped their lunch to the wall, both of which these pieces sold for over $1 million at some point. The modern art world has become dominated by conceptual, abstract, experimental art, most of which that the general population has a hard time interacting with, and there's a general sentiment that it's kind of a joke. But this video isn't about hating abstract art, even though the title is a little bit rage baity, because abstract art is definitely important and it has a place. Absurd, more abstract art was a very real reflection of cultural attitudes just after World War II. The works of Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and Paul Klee really affected people during that time period. The absurdity that they sort of brought to their work helped people process a lot of the tragedy that they had witnessed in the world wars. However, culturally speaking now, attitudes are pretty far from that era. But absurd, more abstract art is still being pushed to the limit. With our current day cultural zeitgeist being so far removed from that context, abstract or absurd experimental art has become exhausting, especially with how much it's pushed. And art is supposed to be an important part of our society, and it should be able to connect on some level with the general public. And this can be done with art that presents a more clear narrative, is figurative or more representational. There is this famous saying where art is supposed to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. But this can't be done when art is too unapproachable for the general population. And that brings us to the point of the video today, where I'm highlighting some modern artists who are a little bit less abstract or perhaps just more approachable that I think you should check out. And listen, I know my art world friends are already probably pretty mad because of the rage baity title of this video. They're probably even more mad that I'm using the word modern art to describe these artists. Listen, I know that the term modern art denotes art from the 1850s to the 1960s and that period, and that we use the term contemporary art to talk about art today. But I'm using the term modern because that's the term most people are familiar with. And the intention of this video is to attract people more into the art sphere rather than entertain people who are already educated in it. So with that little technical note being addressed, here are some modern artists I think you should check out if you're tired of abstract or purely conceptual work, or if you're just looking for something new. The first artist I want to talk about is Eliran Kantor. Eliran Kantor is a painter who has this classical, almost Renaissance-like style to his paintings. He's an oil painter, and the textures and fine brushwork that he uses definitely harken back to that era. You can see he has a lot of inspiration from Peter Paul Rubens or Rembrandt. He also has a lot of similar subject matter to more classical styles of paintings, with him using a lot of Greek myth or Christian imagery, but there's always a bit of a twist to it. It's often surreal. There are elements of chaos, something that you would see from Hieronymus Bosch or sort of the apocalyptic scenes of a John Martin. So you have his work, which is very much classical, but with this interesting dark twist sometimes that gives it this surreal sort of uneasy feeling. The sort of dark twist that he employs in these sort of classical paintings, inspired by his love of metal music and the album artwork, and now his work is often featured on metal albums. But not all of his work employs these sort of dark twists. A lot of it is beautiful and just more subtle. Phil Hale is an American figurative painter whose work is very psychological and somewhat surreal. Phil Hale actually started his career doing illustrations for Stephen King novels and Marvel and DC comics. But his paintings, which he started doing in a fine art context, really defined his career. He often paints these plain, sort of surreal, deeply psychologically unnerving paintings, or these intense dynamic moments of motion. A lot of times he'll paint a car crash or somebody falling. And what's really interesting about this is how he portrays motion through his paintings. Oftentimes with photos or videos, it's sort of blurry, but he's able to capture motion while still showing some of these finer details, something that can really only be done in the field of painting. His work reminds me a lot of Francis Bacon or Diego Velázquez. Phil Hale's world is deeply existential and sort of an unsettling portrait of America, which is haunting but also really fascinating. Takato Yamamoto is a Japanese illustrator and painter who developed a really unique style called Heisei asceticism. This style blends classical Japanese woodblock art with Western Gothic, Art Nouveau, and surrealism. His work is a really interesting cultural fusion that so clearly harkens back to his Japanese heritage, but with very interesting Western subjects such as vampires, Saint Sebastian, Salome. His work can be very macabre and dark. There's also a romantic element to it, and some of it is also just very beautiful. The intricacy that he kind of puts forward in his work is really capturing, and conceptually it's a really cool place to see such unique cultural fusion. Guillermo Lorca García is a Chilean painter who paints these Baroque style fantastical paintings, often involving animals in these strange, fantastical situations. There's an element to his work which is definitely very dreamlike, but the colors and the depth of it is really rich and hyper detailed. He's very technically talented, and what I think is really cool is the variety of animals he paints. Because his style is very much that, tapping into a Baroque style of painting, and the animals which he is showing just aren't in a lot of those paintings. These aren't subjects that are often found in this style, often because painters from this original period didn't have access to see the animals that Guillermo paints. And the fantastical sort of worlds he creates are really capturing and inspiring. Vincent Giarrano is an American contemporary realist painter. He often does these slice of life depictions of urban moments, particularly often women in New York City. Oftentimes he paints these women on the street or in their apartments, but his use of color and sort of the fine details he puts into the scenes are really beautiful. I think you oftentimes see subject matter like this trying to capture a person in their natural element to show their personality. It's often done through photography, but to have it being done by a painter who uses color in such an expressive way is really unique. He has a beautiful style. I love how he captures sort of the contemporary setting, but in a way that's very unique from many of the photographers trying to artistically do the same thing. Demetz is an Italian sculptor who often makes these sculptures of people. Sculptures themselves are often well detailed, but basically the same subject over and over. But what he'll do is he'll add a twist or have some unique element change. He often uses mixed media where he'll cover them with plaster, or he'll have coral or wood embedded in them. And these materials being integrated together has this really interesting effect. He also sometimes chars the statues, covers them in oil, carves them in very intricate ways, but also sometimes very erratic or choppy ways. I think his work is really interesting and beautiful. I've seen it in person because he has taken this very consistent form, found a way to push sculpting in every possible direction with this form. A lot of his work is focused on nature and sort of his own reflections on injury and healing. And I think he has a really interesting way of expressing these themes through sculpture, especially with all the mixed materials he's using. Michael Borremans is a Belgian painter who often creates surrealistic, bizarre, dreamlike paintings. Oftentimes these are these beautiful portraits that have this European modesty to them with this surrealist twist. His paintings kind of give off this vibe where it's almost like Wes Anderson's version of Alice in Wonderland. The color palettes and the sort of pale, delicate nature that his paintings have are really beautiful. They have a certain elegance and humility to them. It sort of feels like a mixture of Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas. Oftentimes there's this sense of uncanny in his work, where things don't necessarily make sense. The sort of subjects and the situations they find themselves in, or the imagery behind it, is just oftentimes bizarre. But the paintings are so beautiful, and it really feels like you're getting tapped into his very unique world. Yoshitaka Amano is a legendary illustrator, character designer, and fine artist. While he's best known for his iconic work for the Final Fantasy video game series or the Vampire Hunter D novels, his work stands, I think, beyond this. Amano blends the styles of Japanese woodblock printing and Japanese ink painting with Art Nouveau and Renaissance influences. He often paints these really fantastical worlds, and I'm sure this is why he was picked up for Final Fantasy and Vampire Hunter D. But the color palettes are often either really pale or these heavenly gold paintings that remind me a lot of a Gustav Klimt. There's this dreamlike, ethereal quality to it, but his use of watercolor is really stunning, and I think he's one of the few watercolor artists on this list. And if you're a fan of anime in any way, you should definitely just go check out his work. Johfra Bosschart is a Dutch surrealist painter, and he sort of has this fantastic take on realism. Oftentimes his subject matter is apocalyptic or mythological, and he somewhat lies between the work of Max Ernst and Hieronymus Bosch, where it's surrealistic in quality. Forms don't necessarily make sense, but it's clearly these mythological or apocalyptic chaotic subject matter. He has a really interesting color palette where he sort of lives in these beiges and aquatic blues, and there's sort of this alien quality to his work where vegetation is often muddled or looks like it's been mutated or from a far-off planet, which is interesting to see because the subject matter, again, is stuff we're familiar with. Ryo Kawada is a Japanese oil painter. She often paints these very muted Western subjects with sort of an ambiguous Japanese sensibility. There's something ominous or mysterious to her work, but it certainly doesn't feel malevolent. A sort of otherworldliness to it, which I think often comes from cultural fusions like this. It's minimalistic, it's pale, but also the texture gives it a very interesting life. There's a sense where these portraits are a bit abstract, but whether it's abstract because of the unique cultural fusion or because it is actually abstract is maybe best unsaid for now. She has a very interesting perspective that she brings to the medium of oil painting that is somewhat reminiscent to Michael Borremans' work. But she does it from a completely different perspective, and I think is definitely worth checking out. In fact, there are a lot of upcoming Japanese painters who have these interesting cultural fusions that I wanted to talk about more for this video, but it's sort of an emerging scene. There isn't a lot of press coverage or online info that I can really find to understand it, besides their social media accounts, which are sort of limited. But other artists which you guys should definitely check out include Kazuto Murakami, the artist who goes by @CB409, and Hikaru Ishiguro. Again, I wanted to talk about these artists more, but they don't have robust websites or portfolios besides their social media accounts, so it's kind of hard to give for me to cover them in a significant way, but I would recommend you check out their work. Speaking of websites, let me quickly transition to the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. As many of you know, besides doing YouTube, I'm also a clothing designer, and Squarespace is integral to me personally for running my business. I'm able to host all of my products with an online store that I built through Squarespace. Squarespace helps me manage my orders, market to my customers, and be able to easily update my website when new products are launched. Whether you sell physical goods, digital content, or services, Squarespace has the tools you need to start selling online. Getting started with Squarespace is easy. All you have to do is select a professionally designed Squarespace website template with options for every use and category. Then customize your look, update content, and add features to fit your needs. Transform any template into your own and stand out online on every device. So whether my customers are coming from mobile or desktop, I know they're still getting the ideal experience and functionality. Easily launch your website and get discovered fast with integrated optimized SEO tools so you show up to more people more often and grow the way you want. Squarespace makes my life easier with its fast and reliable website hosting and design templates, which makes sure I can focus on the things I need to make sure my business is running successfully. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/KarstenKroning to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the list. Paolo Girardi is an Italian painter who mirrors the subject matter of Johfra Bosschart with similar apocalyptic or mythological scenes. But his work is a lot more dramatic or classically, romantically inspired, and it's definitely surreal in a much different way. The way he uses colors are gorgeous. He himself is a really interesting character. He used to be like a professional wrestler of some sort, and it's just interesting to see this professional wrestler using such gorgeous colors and having these very beautiful details. Again, his paintings are somewhat apocalyptic, and his work is often used as metal covers as well. But I think that's just something that naturally happens when you use apocalyptic subject matter. What I think is very interesting is even though the subject matter is somewhat dark, he has this very touching and delicate use of color to it. Like, these are very beautiful visions of the apocalypse. It's so interesting to see such intense, dark subject matter with such graceful technique applied to it. Hitomi Murakami is a Japanese ceramic sculptor who creates these very beautiful sculptures of people that have these sort of floral, natural inlays to them. What she is doing is very, very delicate, and ceramic and the materials that she's using is technically very difficult to work with. It just makes this work so much more impressive considering how intricate it is. It's very, very impressive craftsmanship from her. It's very, very ethereal. It sort of looks like something out of a fantasy world. A lot of the subjects are these people who sort of feel like they're being overtaken by nature in some way, whether it's aquatic elements like seashells, that oftentimes she's doing kind of these hybrids that are sort of these chimeric mermaids. Sometimes it's vines and roots. All of these subjects sort of feel like these ethereal, fantasy, mythological characters that are human-animal hybrids. For me, it's like more pretty, ethereal versions of Davy Jones's crew from Pirates of the Caribbean. I think it's awesome. The next artist, very little is known about this artist. Their handle is this string of numbers, but they go by Ego. And you can really only find their work on Instagram, but they have a pretty impressive portfolio of it. And basically, they paint angels in this beautiful Renaissance-inspired or Baroque way. What I really love about it is how they use light and these pops of gold. It sort of reminds me of this weird hybrid of Gustave Moreau's work or Caravaggio's work. It's almost like he's painting their aura or something like that. It's very beautiful, it's very striking. And while there's not a lot of media covering their work, I hope that they continue to make it and at some point have a gallery showing or something of the sort. I think it's also interesting how committed they are to the subject matter. They're very inspired by Paradise Lost, and they talk a lot about that in the captions. It's cool to see such an expansive body of work around one particular subject matter and theme with such a striking artistic style. Riccardo Gatti is an Italian ceramist, sculptor, and painter, but the work that really strikes me is his sculptures. He sort of mirrors the work of Baroque sculptors like Bernini, but what I think makes him unique is how he often encases his beautiful, highly detailed work in these almost liquid components or frames. It sort of almost encapsulates them, and it almost reminds me of like when Venom from Spider-Man encapsulates people. It's really cool to also see how he incorporates the natural form of the marble. Oftentimes he'll integrate roughness or the natural cracks of the marble in some of his work. The expressions also which he uses for his subjects are also very interesting and highly detailed as well. Jean-Pierre Ugarte is a French painter who kind of taps into the sort of romanticism tradition of doing these landscapes, but with these brutalist monoliths or ruins. It's like if the work of Caspar David Friedrich was for a sci-fi movie. It's really interesting to see him paint these beautiful, calm, lush, very welcoming and easy to look at landscapes, but with these imposing monoliths and ruins integrated into them. And there is this sense where there's this fantasticalness to it because of the scale and the foreignness of these structures. But it's also very grounded, and it's less surreal than a lot of the other artists on this list. They're very pretty, they're very conceptually interesting, and especially if you have an interest in architecture, it's very, very beautiful. One other artist I want to highlight is one who's actually worked and directed videos for my brand. A while ago, I did this huge video for my brand and I worked with a lot of talented people, but the director of this video was also a painter named Indigo Paisel. I really loved working with him, but also just seeing his paintings were really, really stunning and inspiring. His work is really, really surrealistic, has a lot of like heavy emotion and narrative that can be drawn out of it. What I really loved about his work is that he often mixes very modern imagery and characters with classical, mythical, or even like these medieval motifs, which just adds this very surreal quality to it. And also the color palettes are just gorgeous and beautiful as well. His work has this eerie sense to it, but also this very comforting, dreamlike state to it. It's just a really interesting balance of emotions. Henrik Uldalen paints in a classical oil style, but he uses the oil paint and to create these sort of random brush strokes to almost disfigure many of his subjects. He sort of oftentimes wraps them in this haze, paints them in these ethereal floating states. There's something very grounding yet also otherworldly about his work, and it almost feels like to me like this meditation of spiritual ecstasy. It's dreamlike, it's ethereal in a sense. It's also interesting because it is a sort of combination of abstract and classical technique. The world he creates is simultaneously very rich and beautiful, but also mysterious and has this ethereal, strange quality to it. I think what really also makes him interesting is his beautiful colored palettes. He has this sort of flesh-like pink hue to many of his paintings that are often against these black backdrops that really make it pop. There's a lot of room for art to grow and to continue in interesting ways. And while abstract art is great, it can often be combined with more figurative or narrative elements to make something beautiful and more relational to the everyday person. And so that's sort of my list of modern artists that I think you should check out. If you have any recommendations of an artist who is modern who you didn't see on this list, definitely comment them down below so other people can check them out. And if you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button. Thank you again. My name is Karsten Kraning, and have a great day.